Our speaker today is Todd Van Beck, and Todd hails from the farmland of Iowa. He was educated in Boston and has been a funeral director for 44 years. He is the author of many articles, has written several books, and has lectured and taught across the globe. He just returned from a nationwide tour of New Zealand, and Todd is a friend to many funeral directors and cemeterians in BC. He has traveled throughout Canada for the last 25 years. He's a graduate of Mount St. Mary's Seminary, Boston University, and the New England Institute of Mortuary Science in Boston. On behalf of the McCall Brothers Funeral Directors of Victoria, we're pleased to sponsor the following presentation, Our Heritage, Caring, Compassionate Concern. Welcome, Todd.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Some years back, I was asked to do an embalming seminar for the Ohio Embalmers Association in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve University. And these were in the early days of my speaking career, and I would get pretty nervous, and so I always checked out the room ahead of time. This place was going to be pretty well packed. About 400 Ohio embalmers were coming, and the reason the room was going to be packed was not because I was there, but because June 30th was the cutoff date for the CEU hours, and a bunch of them needed to get caught up, you see. All right, I don't know if that sounds familiar here in BC, but we knew we were going to have a packed house. So I get there early, and I sit down, and I go into this big auditorium. It wasn't very cordial like you've got. It was just seats, rows. That's like a big auditorium lecture hall. And there was one single undertaker by himself in the front row, sitting there all by himself. Out of 500 seats, this guy is there 3 hours ahead of the seminar, sitting by himself. And so I thought, I'll go over and talk to him, see? And so as I went over, I sat right next to him. Now there are two people in this empty auditorium, and he's looking at the program. And he picks the program up, and I went to shake my hand to him, and he said, before I could do anything of cordiality, he leaned over to me and he said, "Have you ever heard Todd Van Beck give a talk?" And I first thought he was joking. See? And I looked at him, and before I could say anything, he said to me, he said, "I've heard him 100 times, and he's absolutely horrible." Then he looked at me and he goes, "You know, this is going to be a real yawner today." Now, have you ever had private thoughts that you don't say? Because what I looked at, and I thought, and so I looked at him, and I've got some Midwestern orneriness in me, and I thought, I'll play along with you, you old bastard, right? Right? That was a private thought that I was thinking, right? And I'll tell you folks, because I've got a lot of friends in this room. I said, I've heard him too, and he is absolutely horrible. And the speaker got up as the young man introduced me. And when they mentioned my name, I stood up. And as I walked up to the podium, I looked back at him and I did this. Right. Now, he left at the break, and I've never seen him since. Right? One of the great things that I've found as I've aged, and I guess I've kind of always had some of this, was I never took myself too seriously. I took funeral service and still take funeral service very seriously, but I never took myself too seriously. And so because of that, you know, if I say something today in the time that I've been allotted to share some thoughts with you, I hope you'll forgive me, because some of the observations that I want to make on history and on customs go to the heart of what is going on in every funeral home on the face of the earth. There is absolutely no question that when we were in New Zealand, it was the same, what I'm going to call now, I'm going to use a word that probably isn't very attractive, grumbling. You ever met people that grumble? Grumbling people. All right, I'll give you an example of this, all right? Yesterday, I started grumbling about funeral service. I started grumbling about everything I didn't like about what's going on. And let me tell you, I've got a damn laundry list of stuff I don't like that's going on. All right? And the people I'm with, they start grumbling. Have you ever noticed how grumbling's contagious? So last night, because I've had a few experiences in this city, there was a period in my career where I spent a lot of time in Vancouver. And one of my favorite places was the Hotel Vancouver. They have a dandy bar down there. And they have this wonderful God's created elixir called Canadian Club and Ginger Ale. I have been addicted to this concoction for years, even before I knew that it was made in Canada, you see. And so I walked down to the Hotel Vancouver last night, and I went to the bar, and as I'm sitting there, there were 5 or 6 people, tables of people in there, and guess what they were doing? Grumbling. And this one table was grumbling about their boss. They had nothing good to say about their boss until the boss came to join them at the table, then the grumbling stopped. Now, I'm not here to criticize, see. I'm simply here to say that grumbling is part of the human experience. And when people tell me they don't grumble, I don't believe them. Because we got stuff to grumble about. I'm not big on optimism, and I'm not big on pessimism. Because I don't think either of them are consistent in the human experience. I hear a lot of grumbling about history. All right? If only we could go back to the customs of the old days. If only we didn't have all these families that they just don't seem to understand what we're trying to do. If only things could go back to the way they were when I started in funeral service. That is a natural human psychology. There's nothing wrong with it, because it is through grumbling that I found that people determine how they're going to deal with changes. The grumbling is a natural process, because when I meet the Pollyannas of the world, have you met them? These really, really happy people. I don't respond well to them, because I look at funeral service and I think of all that's changed. The grumbling, though, I'm going to encourage it. In fact, today I'm going to do a little bit of grumbling. Let me give you an example of this. I got a client of mine in Kansas City. Have you ever, not in this group, of course, and not in BC, because you lovely, lovely people out here, but have you ever met funeral directors that you walked away thinking that they had really inordinately large egos? Has it happened? I've been accused of it. Probably you've been accused of it, or people have grumbled about it. Egos. Here it is. I got a client in Kansas City, and here's what he was up against. Now, this is not Pollyanna stuff. This is just blunt truth. He was doing 800 funerals a year when his dad was alive. He had lost 300 of those services in 5 years, and he had accounts receivables of $325,000 US. He calls me up, and the issue was, can you come out and maybe help us? I went to Kansas City, and the conversation started out grumbling. He grumbled about the ministers. He grumbled about people not going to church. He grumbled about his whacked out staff. He grumbled about the cremation rate. He grumbled about body donations. He grumbled about the anti-funeral communists that seemed to be invading Kansas City, Missouri. The problem that came in, though, was we got stuck in grumbling. Now, let me give you an example of some history here. Some of you have heard my reference in my career to my work years ago in Omaha, Nebraska. I worked for a funeral home called the Heafy and Heafy Mortuary. Now, these two brothers owned this place, Heafy and Heafy, that's where the name came from, and their egos were so big that they'd go drinking, see, at night, And they'd ask me to go along with them, and after they'd had enough drink, they'd start getting in an argument about whose name was first on the damn sign. Heafy and Heafy, all right? This funeral home was froze in time, all right? And they never grumbled about that. The Heafy brothers wanted it froze in time. It was primarily a Roman Catholic funeral home, so cremation was absolutely off our radar screen. We never did afternoon funerals because only Protestants did afternoon funerals. And Mr. Heafy said, this is where you're going to sit. By God, that's where people sat. He would say, this is when you're going to stand up, and by God, that's when people stood up. It was set, solid, and secure. We had an incident one time when I was just starting out that the doorbell rang on the funeral home. I went downstairs because I was the dust pledge guy. You know what I'm talking about? That was my state in life. I had a pledge can in this hand and a dust rag in this hand, and I'm spraying and I'm dusting woodwork. The doorbell rings. Lady's on the front porch. She's crying. Oh, what seems to be the trouble? My mother's dying down at the nursing home, and they told us to come up and talk to Mr. Heafy about getting her affairs in order. Now, today, in the 21st century, seems a sensible enough plot. But in 1960, when this stuff happened, let me tell you, this was get your affairs in order. What are you talking about? So I went upstairs, and here he comes downstairs. The guy was a wonderful funeral director. I'm telling you. I honor his memory every day because he gave me a chance that nobody else was giving me. He hired me. But he comes downstairs, and remember the banker on the Monopoly board? That's what he looked like. He had a mustache, and he wore a striped pants and a vest. And, oh God, he looked, and he had two voices, folks. I don't know if you can relate to this. He had two voices. He had his normal human being voice, but then he had his undertaker voice. And he'd be looking at you and he'd go, did you get the tires washed on that hearse for tomorrow morning's funeral? And I go, yes, sir, we did. And then I'd say, Mr. Heafy, there's somebody behind you who need to talk to you. And he'd look around and he'd go, hello. He did it constantly, all right? We knew the minute he shifted into the undertaker voice that our behavior had to change also because it was important. A family was there, a priest is there, somebody's there. So he comes downstairs and he comes over and he goes, what seems to be the trouble, my dear? She goes, my mom's dying at the nursing home. And they told me, and Mr. Heafy comes over, takes her hand. And I'm over in the corner listening to this. See, I didn't learn anything about being a funeral director in mortuary school. This is how I learned it, was in the funeral home watching these old guys go at it. And Mr. Heafy later goes, here it is. Oh, my dear. My own mother died 52 years ago, and it cuts like a knife when I think about it. There's nothing more difficult than to lose one's mother. And I'm over in the corner, I'm sitting there going, hot damn, is this guy good, right? I mean, where the hell do you come up with this stuff at? And so I'm putting it in long-term memory. They didn't talk about, let us hope the diagnosis is an error, all that. And he says, come with me. And she looks at him. And as they're walking down the threshold of sympathetic understanding, which we call the foyer of the funeral home, she looks and she goes, we were wondering about what's the cheapest thing you got. Could we get her cremated? Now, some of the older guys in this room can well relate to how the old guys that taught us would relate. He turned around and he absolutely gave her a lesson. And the lesson was this. We do not cremate. You shouldn't worry about this at the time. And blah, blah, blah. He went through the whole grumbling about things that he didn't like right to her. Now let me ask you a very intimate funeral director question that we don't hardly ever hear in seminars. Have any of you lost a call? Not here in BC, I'm sure. But has any of you ever picked up the newspaper and all of a sudden the sweat's going back on your neck and you get this hollow pit even though you just ate lunch? And all of a sudden you feel this nauseated feeling because you're looking and you're running to the funeral register book, you're slamming a name into the computer and it did. Oh my God, we lost a call. 6 months later, this woman's mother was dead, and they called another funeral home other than Heafy and Heafy. And my boss was so upset about this that he called a meeting. And here's the meeting. What did I say to her? This is what I said to her. And then he asked us the magic question. Here it is. Did I do anything wrong? Guess what we said to him? Hell, in unison, like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. No. God, no. You're the Archduke of Death. You don't make any mistakes. Your name's on the sign. You sign the checks. You are errorless, sinless. You are literally God's gift to the funeral profession. We talked about this for 3 hours. The staff did. I'm sitting there, I'm just a kid, and oh, Jesus, we lost a call. Oh, my God, I didn't even know what losing a call meant, but oh, God, we lost the call. 3 hours later, we all walked out, la, 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 la. Feeling wonderful. Have you ever had this happen? Start out, woo, doo, doo, and walk out, la, 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 la. Because we had concluded that the reason we lost this call was because the daughter that I was talking to and he was talking to was a kook. The guy in Kansas City thought people were kooks. And he grumbled a hell of a lot about people being kooks. And I got to tell you, the history of this great profession is anybody in our profession that grumbles enough about people that are kooks are not going to be very successful at this. The history of this great profession, you cannot tell me that since 1912 in the Dominion province of British Columbia, that the successful funeral directors in this city, in this province, walked around thinking people were kooks. They couldn't grumble about that. They ought not to grumble about that, because grumbling about history has the risk of getting it stuck. Grumbling about customs that change, and here's one for us, customs that have already changed, get us stuck. And when we grumble about being stuck in history, nothing improves. And let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you this. I saw it today. People, they may grumble about funeral service. They may grumble, but they grumble out of their own illiteracy and disconnect to it. Because I got to tell you, folks, funerals are really interesting to human beings. What you do and I do for a living, the truth is, funerals are really interesting stuff. Now, it's up for grabs when they have no information and they walk through our front door. They haven't been to church in 40 years and they walked. It's up for grabs. So I'm not talking here of scolding anybody, but I'm saying I watched from my hotel room last night and this morning. And I watched out of my room the two antique hearses out on the property here. And you're not going to tell me that Archie and Edith Bunker, you're not going to tell me that little kids in Vancouver, British Columbia, aren't interested in funerals. They'd stop, they'd look at that hearse, they'd put their, what the hell's in there? Never seen that before. And I thought to myself, what an opportunity if a couple funeral directors had been stationed out there to explain to these people what that hearse was all about, where the traditions of using a hearse came from, where the history of this funeral profession, that it came from the Romans and their funeral professions that ended up being the precursor of the Mardi Gras parades in New Orleans. There's a tremendous history to this stuff, and we certainly don't have time to go through it. However, when we look at history, we cannot presume that because it's not interesting to us, it isn't interesting to other people. We cannot even presume that because it's routine to us. A hearse is a hearse is a hearse is a hearse is a hearse. One of the big tricks I always pull in my seminars when I've got like 8 hours to talk is I ask people in the funeral home staff, how many of you have never driven a hearse before? And almost all of the staff raise their hand. And I give a mandate to the owners of those funeral homes, give your secretaries the keys to the hearse and let them take them downtown Vancouver and let them soak in what it's like when people see a moving symbol of death, when they see the mobile symbolism of funeral service. And I got to tell you, when you see a hearse coming down the street, it isn't like your response of Mr. Ding Ding the ice cream truck. You pull up to, how many of you never driven a hearse? Put your hands up. Never driven a hearse. Then by God, you got to get the keys. Because here's one, you're stuck. Get down in Vancouver, because you're going to see people and they're going to look up at you and they're going to go, oh God. They'll make a sign. People that haven't been to church in 40 years will make a sign of the cross because the history of funeral service stimulates this. People that look at history, people that are unaware of their customs, where they came from, and have no clue basically where they're going, because they make a fatal mistake. And here's the 4 fatal mistakes they make. People that are unaware of what I'm speaking about, they begin to think that it's never been as bad as it is. They begin to think that it's never happened to anybody before. They begin to think that my problems are the worst problems on the face of the earth. And they make a fatal error. They get paralyzed by that and they refuse to change and find solutions to it. In 1912, President William Howard Taft was President of the United States. In 1912, Robert Laird Borden was the Prime Minister of Canada. And in 1912, which we're going to discuss tomorrow, I hope you all show up for this, as the report to you of the activities of the funeral directors in the maritime provinces when the Titanic sank 100 years ago this month. However, in 1912, the absolute typical funeral, here it was now in 1912, they'd figured out arterial embalming, so the body got embalmed. They had a casket that was taken to a house, and they had basically horse-drawn equipment. 1912, there was a casket, embalming, and a hearse. In 1922, Dr. Banting in Toronto discovered insulin. In 1922, the average funeral was now a motorized hearse, but a casket, and the body went home, maybe to a funeral home. In 1932, the Great Depression economically shattered every preconceived notion in Canada and the United States. But in 1932, still, a funeral was casket, embalming, and a layout. In 1942, World War II changed the entire aura of the United States and Canada. In 1942, the typical funeral was still embalming, a casket, and a hearse. In 1952, wonder drugs were coming out that was extending people's lives to eras that the human race had no idea was even possible. And that was 60 years ago, and it's only increased over the last 60 years. In 1952, the average funeral was a hearse, a casket, and embalming. Until 1962. And in 1962, the customs of Canada and the United States went through an abrupt change, and it's never gone back. Because in 1962, the anti-funeral history began. Jessica Mitford wrote a book in the United States called The American Way of Death, which is still in publication. It's still the most frequently read book by the laity about what it is we do for a living. In 1962, the customs and the culture changed. And in 1962, when I began in funeral service, it was still the importance of a hearse, embalming, and a layout. Now, we were ignorant of our history. We were ignorant that people are going to care for their dead, and that it has always been this way. People are going to care for their dead in a consistent manner with how they live their life. So grumbling about people, grumbling about their lifestyles, grumbling about this, here's one. Without any advocacy from the funeral home and the individual funeral director, these people walk into the funeral home with a half a century of value systems that are different than the traditions from 1912 to 1962 in the funeral profession. The funeral directors, myself included, that understand that, finally saw it, and more importantly, adopt it and are sensitive to it, a whole arena of creativity opens up for them. Because another thing we've learned from customs and history is history repeats itself, but if you're not aware of it, you're going to get stuck in repeating it without even knowing it. I'll give you an example. We know that the Greeks, I just finished writing a chapter in a textbook on cremation. It's being published in Germany. I don't know why in the hell they asked me to do it from Germany. But I wrote this textbook, or this chapter on the history of cremation. And in the history, it was clear that the Greeks invented urn burials. There it is, okay? The Greeks invented urn burials. Take an urn and put it in the ground. All right, now, I went to a meeting one time. Do you have a sense of humor? I hope that this makes you laugh, because looking back at it, Jesus, this is how life is, isn't it? It's not perfect, is it? I go to a meeting, and I go to a bar with a couple of guys, and this was maybe 15 years ago, and one of these guys, after a couple of drinks, he's looking over at me and goes, "You know, I invented urn burials." And I'm going, "No shit, Batman. You invented urn burials." And I'm sitting there going, and hell, I would use it in seminars. I'd go out in the world and say, you know, Fred Flintstone invented urn burials. See, without an awareness of the history, I was gullible. And then I, and hence, was saying things that were not accurate. History teaches us that people are going to care for their dead in a consistent manner with how they live their lives. History also, and our awareness of customs, heightens our personal attitudes toward our ability to change. Because if the customs have already changed, and you and I are resisting that, See, the other day, when I was grumbling with my friends, I have this idea that history is already repeating itself in the funeral profession. I have to be honest with you. I absolutely see it. And I'll give this to you. Historically, in our profession, in Canada and the United States, the idea that an undertaker could survive, particularly in small communities, on simply doing funerals exclusively was absurd. It was absolutely so far off their radar screens that they couldn't even conceive of it, because the economics of a funeral were not there for them to succeed. So what they did was they opened up a furniture store. What they did was they started building cabinets. What they did was they operated a livery stable. The guy in my hometown out in Iowa was the farm, and he was the John Deere dealer, and he was the undertaker on the side. Now, we went through from 1912, as I've tried to paint this out, to 1962, this era where it was like written in stone of how things were done. The public accepted it. The public went along with it. Our funeral homes prospered. We felt a sense of and all legitimate. There was no coercion. There was no history of all of this stuff the anti-funeral people come up with. However, now I see this, that the funeral homes are again diversifying. I see it when I look and see I'm doing weddings now. I see it when I look at these funeral homes that have tables and chairs to do receptions. And I'm not saying that that is the entire idea. Let me give you an example of diversification. Our history teaches us clearly that people who honestly grumble about problems and come up with solutions to their problems do much better than people that just grumble about it. Have you ever met what I'm talking about? Have you ever met the type of personality that they are absolutely excellent at grumbling about everything? but they're not in the position or want to change a thing. But grumbling's good, change is bad. Let me give you an example of this. I don't know about Canada. Did anybody notice that Walmart is selling caskets? Anybody catch that? Okay. How much grumbling do you think happened in the United States when that came out? Well, you want me to imitate it? Because I heard it. It was on the telephone, on my website. It was in emails, and it was like, oh, those communist Walmart people. This is against democracy and Americanism and freedom and nationalism, and and they're getting their caskets from China. And oh my God. Oh, and here's these guys, the guy, oh, they're getting their caskets from China. Oh, Todd, what do you think of that? I'm going, it's a sign of the times, isn't it? Yeah, but we got to buy American. We got to buy American. And so we grumbled about buying American. Don't have that Chinese stuff on the floor. And then after he got done grumbling, he looked at me and goes, would you like to go to dinner with us? I said, sure. Right? He said, my wife and my daughter are going to join us. I said, well, that's great. He pulls up with a Lexus to take me to dinner. His daughter pulls in with a BMW. Of course, that's not an import because it's German. Here's one, grumbling with action. Here it is. You're going to laugh at it, but I believe that when we look at customs, it is an era of time when new customs are being created. And I'll tell you who's creating them, the public. And if we can be the orchestrator to show them a guide and a navigator to help them create meaningful customs, and I believe a lot of this is going on. I absolutely believe this. I don't think it's alive and well in Kansas City, though, because he's grumbling about people. And if you're grumbling about people and you're in this line of work, you are absolutely on a collision course with the inevitable. I'll give you an example. I had a funeral director, does 70 calls a year. And Walmart comes to town. All right? Now, Walmart put the tire dealer out of business. Walmart put the gasoline pump guy out of business. Walmart put the grocery store out of business. Walmart put the shoe cobbler out of business. Walmart put everybody out of business, but the funeral director was safe because he was living in this Walmart's not interested in funerals. Well, Walmart wasn't interested in funerals, but clearly Walmart was interested in merchandise. And from my read of Walmart, they're not too particular about what merchandise they're selling. Kind of the cradle of the grave concept. And so they start selling caskets, and here's one. What do you think the grumbling happened? Here it is. Have you ever met people, myself included, that live in denial for a while? Denial? That is a powerful emotion. Here's what. Oh, that'll never happen in my town. Or here's what. You know how they do? All right. I know my families. This funeral home's been here. Hell, we buried Moses. Right? We've been here, and people love us. They love us. We are loved. Do you understand that, Todd? We are beloved in this community. No, I'm sure you are. And this guy, yeah, Walmart selling caskets, and he goes, my families will never buy. No, never buy. Well, let's take a look at the United States. Can't talk about Canada. Here it is. Funeral over here, $8,000. Tuition for college over here, $10,000. Grandma dies, I can get a casket for $500. Now, that was it. It had nothing to do with loyalty. It had nothing to do with being beloved. It had everything to do with a change. People's value systems have changed. And so here comes the Walmart casket delivered to his back door. Now, how do you think that went over? Let your imaginations just go with you. He was on the phone and ranting and raving and ranting and raving. And so I said to him, maybe you ought to create instead of compete. Create instead of compete. Do something to change history instead of grumbling about it. Well, what am I? I said, hell, I don't know. I can give you the concept, but you live there. It's your town. It's not my town. I don't know your people. I don't know their ethnic makeup. I don't know their racial makeup. I know nothing about it. So he calls me up. Now, here's an example. I want to pass this on to you. This is, I believe, what's happening in funeral service that has proven to be successful. This leap into history. This leap to change things. Walmart comes up with this big ad, and it's the time to take pictures with Santa Claus. You have that up here? Okay? I took my son every year. He's kicking and screaming, and he's attacking Santa Claus. He's ripping at the guy's beard. He's having a nervous breakdown. We're all sitting there, smile. Jesus, hitting honky dogs at him and all that stuff. Here's this 300-pound man with a white beard and a red suit, and we expect a 2-year-old to behave normally. Walmart puts the ad in. Here it is. $29.95, you get 6 pictures. $39.95, you get 12. $49.95, you get 24. But the real deal is $79.95, you get 112. And that was the deal. This funeral director called me up. Have you ever heard a really wacky new idea? Any of you? Something that's so far off the radar screen that even people like me that promote this stuff are going, are you nuts? Well, that won't, are you crazy? Here's his idea. He's going to hire his own Santa Claus. And he's going to put him in a room off the side of the funeral home and put an ad in the paper and offer free pictures with Santa Claus at the mortuary. For free, because he hates Kmart. Well, Walmart, he hates that company because they brought a casket to him. He's all honked off over this thing, see? And I'm sitting there going, you're going to do what? A Santa Claus in a mortuary? And he goes, I think people show up. Maybe from the lunatic asylum, people will show up. I said, he goes, no. He said, this is going to do good. I'm going to put an ad in the paper, and we're going to. And he said, and our postmaster weighs 300 pounds. He doesn't need a pillow. Okay? And the postmaster said, and this was a man after my own heart, if I get a fifth of Canadian Club, I'll come over and be Santa Claus for you. Okay? All right? If I had lived closer to him, I would have been Santa Claus for him. The evening that Santa Claus was in a side room at the mortuary, 2 nights, a Friday night and a Saturday, from 5 until 8, 310 people brought their children to get their pictures taken from Santa Claus. His wife took the pictures, and he lined up everything. They had a beautiful chair already in the funeral home in the family room that was just sitting there, hadn't used it in 40 years. Nobody used the family room anymore. Here's that, the Archduke of Death throne sitting there, nothing, never been used, right? And so they put Santa Claus in there, and Santa Claus is, taking a break and having his little, all right, and all is well with the world. But the key to it was this. That night he wrote over $58,000 in pre-need funerals. But the kicker of the thing was this. One woman came over to him, and this is the power of changing history, of creating a new custom. We look at customs sometimes and we think, oh, it's got to be a hearse, and it's got to be the way a casket is, and it's got to be symbolism, it's got to mean something, and all these ponderous things. That's great. Pondering is good. But my mother and dad out in Iowa don't ponder a lot. They like things that make them feel good. They like that stuff. They like it. They don't have to think about it too much. They enjoy it, and they respond to it, right? And so I got to tell you, Santa Claus was responding. But the key that touched me was that the one woman came up. She had 5 children, and they were obviously socially and economically deprived. I mean, obviously, how she behaved and the way she looked. She said, "I can't thank you enough." She said, "You know, we've got a large family." And she said, "We didn't know what we were going to do because all the other kids in town are getting their picture taken with Santa Claus. And I didn't know what to do because we couldn't afford it. And the $29.95 thing from Walmart, that was a joke. That's a scam. 12 pieces of paper off a camera, that's a joke." And she said, "We couldn't do the $79.95, but she said, we did this one." And she said, "Mr. Funeral Director, I just want to tell you something. I've got about $80 more now to buy Christmas gifts for my kids and to buy some more food for dinner." And I'm sitting there going, amen, hallelujah, that's it. Now that might take the form of a reception hall. That might take a leap of faith, etc. That might take a leap of faith. Because I can tell you this, the history of the funeral profession, when it is finally written, it's going to say this: from 1962 until whenever they finally write another one, the financial structure of our profession has changed. The profit margins and where we get our income and our disposable income has changed. You know it and I know it. And so the question now is, what do we do with this? All right, now I want to pass a couple last things on to you, and then my time with you good folks are be coming to a close. And also, I want to thank you all for inviting me back here. I can tell you, walking around downtown Vancouver last night in the rain was very memorable to me, right? Because I had some of the greatest of the great experiences in my career here, and I'm going to be absolutely frank with you, I had some of the most despicable experiences in my career also within the borders of this city. That's another seminar, all right? When we look at our careers, I think we've got 3 choices. We can leave. We can grumble so much that we probably ought to leave. Find something else to do. We can stay and grumble about doing nothing. Right? And I'm not so sure that choice isn't even more dangerous than just leaving. The ones that stay and all they do is grumble. But the third choice is we can stay and we can ask Santa Claus to come to our funeral home. Because it had nothing to do in the end whether that funeral director approved of that. What was the absolute deciding factor was that the public approved of it. Didn't violate the sacredness of our great profession. He wasn't a communist. The public approved of it. Is there a risk to that? Sure, there's a risk to it. But the consequences for him was he wouldn't have struck a blow against Walmart. And not only was he happy about his $58,000, and not only was his heart warmed that he had helped a woman get 80 more bucks free to buy some presents and some food for Christmas dinner. What he was really overjoyed about was he struck a blow against a mighty corporation that was raping and pillaging American businesses, and particularly American small businesses. There is an ancient story, it's been told. There is a man, and if you want to follow this up, I would suggest you do this. How many of you like heroes? Any of you got heroes in your life? See, there's a cynicism out there. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed people are cynical today? More cynical than they used to be. Because you talk about heroes, see, and you'll say oh, this person's a great person. And then you'll hear, have you met the yeah buts? The yeah buts. Yeah, but, yeah. I'll give you an example in the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. is a great human being. But I was talking about him one night, and this guy in the bar said, yeah, but he had a lot of girlfriends. See what I'm saying? You know, bring the nobility of the thing down to a cynical idea that he had some girlfriends. Not that he changed the way we look at race relations in the United States, and not that he had legislation. Let's just talk about his girlfriends, even though we don't know who they are. That's a cynicism that I have found an irritant to me, because I like some heroes. I like to look at men and women and look at what they've done, not necessarily how they live now, but what they have done in their life. And one man that I would say you should Google is a man named Dr. Russell Herman Conwell. And Russell Herman Conwell was an attorney and also a Baptist preacher who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And he left the law because he had been called by the Lord to be a minister. And he went into the most desolate area of Philadelphia to minister. And one day, 3 totally impoverished young boys came over and said this, "Dr. Conwell, we want an education. There's only one way for us to get out of this place, and that's for us to have an education." And Russell Conwell looked at him and said, "Well, young men, you have no money. You can't go to the university." And they said, No, we know that. We don't care about the diploma. We want to be educated. And you're the most educated man we know. Will you teach us? And Russell Herman Conwell came up with this. I hope you'll find this attractive. He looked and he said, "That is a worthy ideal." Now I'm going to freeze that frame a minute. I have come to the conclusions after 44 years in funeral service that success, not just in funeral service, but success in life has a definition. And it's this: it is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. I'll say it again. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Now hold that thought. Russell Herman Conwell looked at these 3 young men and said, it is a worthy ideal for people to become educated. There's worth to that. And it is an ideal that people hope for. And he said, maybe I can do something. Well, Russell Herman Conwell was as poor as the 3 young men that he was talking to. And so he found this story that I'm going to tell you it. And Russell Herman Conwell went across the United States and Canada. He was actually here in Vancouver, and he raised money telling this story, and here's the story. The story is told about an African farmer who is a subsistence farmer. He's just eking out a living in the center of Africa. And one day, this traveler goes by this impoverished farmer and said, "Do you know they're finding diamonds all over the continent of Africa?" And the farmer goes, "You're kidding me." He goes, "Yeah, what are you doing here? You're spinning your wheels. You're grumbling about everything here. You don't like this farm. You don't like the people. You don't like having to work. You don't like any. You're grumbling about this farm. Go out and look for diamonds." And the farmer goes, "Yeah, hell, that's an idea. I won't be grumbling anymore because I'll be a multi-millionaire." And so he sold the farm to the first person that gave him an offer. He took all that money that he bought for what that was worth, and he went out and purchased mining equipment. He went all over Africa digging for mine, digging for diamonds, digging, didn't find one diamond. And in the midst of despair, he stands on top of a rushing river, and he throws himself in and drowns himself. About the time the first farmer drowns himself, the second farmer that bought the farm is out fishing with his son. And they look down in the stream and they see this shiny stone. And they pick up the stone as a novelty and they take it home, they put it on their mantle. And pretty soon another traveler comes by, and the traveler was a mineralogist. And the traveler was familiar with stone and rock. And he said, "What's that strange rock you've got on your mantle?" And the farmer said, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "My son and I found it when we were out fishing." And the mineralogist said, "Wait, sir, do you know what you've got?" And he goes, "No, I don't know." He said, "You have a diamond worth a king's ransom." And the farmer looked at him and he said, "I do?" He goes, "I'm telling you, sir." He goes, and the farmer says, "Well, we've been finding these things all over the place down here. Every time we plow, these goofy stones start popping up." The farmer His farm eventually became the Kimberley Diamond Mine, which is to this day the largest diamond mine on the face of the earth. And Dr. Russell Herman Conwell called this talk Acres of Diamonds. And he said this: if you have a mission in your life to progressively follow the worthy ideal, and I'll give you some worthy ideals in funeral service: be of service to people, help people, ethically care for the dead, show compassion to the living, no matter how many kooks you run into and no matter how many grumblings go on. The worthy ideal, the Acres of Diamonds, is hell, our funeral homes. We're standing right on our acres of diamonds. So the question that's always going to be posed now is, what do we do with this? I would suggest to you a couple of things. First of all, I think we've got to listen to our vendors. I think we need to grumble with them. I think we need to challenge them. I think we need to look at this stuff that they've all come up with, and we need to be discursive. But I think we need to listen to them, because they certainly are creative. And they're helping us with this issue, the mission of helping people solve their problems when death enters their lives, which is the key to the future and the substance of funeral service. But I also want to suggest to you that the lessons that I've learned, that I've tried to share with you today, come down to the thought of another hero of mine. Maybe it's going to be wedding receptions. Maybe it's going to be, maybe it'll be reception. Maybe it will be that the funeral home function changes. It already has become that. But here's what Dr. Schweitzer had to say. He said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know: the only ones of you, among you, who will really be happy are those who have sought and found how to serve people. And it seems to be the key of the beauty and the majesty of the funeral profession. I will end with this last thing. When I was working for Heafy and Heafy, I was kind of a bumblebutt. You know what I'm talking about? I put flowers on the wrong graves so many times they wouldn't let me take the flowers to the cemetery. All right, anybody done that here? I'm the only one in this room who's ever put flowers on the wrong grave? Okay, all right, I'll stand alone on it. I'll stand alone. I did all kinds of other things. My boss came down to the prep room one day, and he hadn't embalmed a body in 50 years. But he comes down one day, we're busy as hell down there. And he comes in and he goes, you need some help? I go, well, what the hell am I going to say? No, right? We don't need you. You own the funeral home, but that's what I wanted to say, right? Because he was in the way constantly, right? And so I said, all right. So we're dressing bodies and we get everything ready to go. And about an hour and a half later, the old man looks around and he goes, what the hell did I do with my suit coat? I know I'd only put it on a corpse, I cut it down the back. Okay, so that was another red letter day at the old Heafy and Heafy mortuary on Farnham Street. One day we went to the cemetery, and it's a long story, make it short. I backed the hearse up, and as I backed the hearse up, the right-hand door of the flower door was left open. I hit a monument with it and tore the door off the hearse. Right in the middle of damn committal. Right? I'm telling you, the priest is underneath the tent going the 23rd Psalm, and all of a sudden you hear this ripping, screeching noise, of the damn door coming off the hearse. See, my boss heard it, and he's 40 yards down the hill under the tent, and here he did this. He goes, all right. Now our eyes locked. Have you ever had the feeling where your mouth's perfectly dry and you're wet everywhere else? Right? Now, that was bad enough, but I got to tell you, the real kicker was driving the hearse back to the funeral home. In a city, you get a lot of stares, folks, when you got a back door ripped off of a hearse. He gave me that day, though, he came down and he said this. He said, now you had a bad day today. I'm going, no kidding, Batman, right? And he said, now you're going to have more bad days. And you know what? He was telling me the gospel truth. There were going to be more bad days ahead. There have been great days, but there were going to be some more bad ones. And he said, why don't you take this? He said, maybe when you get down on things, he said, this will help you out a little bit. He said, and it's a little poem. Now, I want to take a private moment here, if I might. And I believe you'll indulge me with that, because we're still in our time limit. Some of the most outstanding funeral directors that I have ever been privileged to deal with came from British Columbia. I worked with men, and some of them are sitting right in this room, who changed my life because of who they were as human beings. And we all in this room had a good 10-year run at it. I want to say that publicly for those of you who are here that know exactly what the hell I'm talking about. Because to you, many of you in this room, I owe a sense of gratitude that I've not been able to repay because of distance and time. But I want to recite this little verse that my boss gave to me. I want to dedicate it to the people in this room who I've just referred to, but I also want to dedicate it to the new funeral directors in this room who are just starting out and who I would say need to hang on to the worthy ideal, understand their history, understand that they can change history. They can create new customs. Our ancestors did it. Now, they didn't have to do it the way we're being asked to do it, but then we didn't have to do stuff like they're asked to do. History is fluid. Customs go and they come and they leave and then they're back again. So I want to dedicate it to the new funeral professionals. I want to dedicate it to my friends and to the British Columbia Funeral Directors Association in general, and the Cemetery Association that's now part of the group that you've amalgamated. You're both part of each other. You've brought the, and can I take the political risk? Maybe I won't be invited again. You did the right thing. As God is my witness, you did the right thing. Everywhere I go in the States, the ones that refuse to amalgamate are having problems surviving. They're having problems just meeting payroll, cash. All right, so I congratulate you for what my humble opinion's worth, and I hope I haven't offended anybody by this fairly strong comment from a Yank from the excited states of America. All right. Although I don't feel a stranger when I come to Canada. I don't feel a stranger at all. So let me recite this to you, and then my time with you good folk is over. And I do hope that you'll all come to hear this Titanic thing, because I put a hell of a lot of damn work on the thing for you. All right? Okay. I mean, this was not just a slam dunk program, all right? Okay. It goes this way. It says, the midnight hour, the darkest hour that human grief may know, sends forth its hurried summons and asks me to come, I go. I know not where the blow may fall. I know not for whom the bell may toll. I only know that I must go in answer to that call. Perhaps a friend, perhaps unknown. It is fate that turns that wheel. The tangled scheme in human life winds slowly on the reel. And I'm the undertaker. Cold-blooded, you'll hear some say, trained to the shock and chill of death with a heart that is cold and gray. Trained. Is that what they call it? How little they know the rest. I'm human and well understand the sorrow that throbs in the aching breast. God bless you all, and thank you for your kind attention. Appreciate it.